Welcome to my rainy car. We're going to be talking about autosuggestion today. I feel like I've made a few videos about autosuggestion when it's been raining outside. What we're going to discuss today in this car video is not an easy thing to explain or to discuss, and for that reason is often ignored in manifesting, law of attraction, law of assumption circles, whatever way you want to describe these principles being talked about. We hear so many theories on social media, on YouTube, so many interesting ideas, but then it can be hard to apply them to our day-to-day life. While when we discuss autosuggestion and the stuff that Emile Coué talked about, it seems very, very relevant to our everyday life, but we'll often find is more difficult to apply than it might at first seem. So, I'm not against discussing these far out esoteric theories when it comes to manifesting ideas that are so popular on YouTube, but I'm rather agnostic about most of them compared to the very practical element that Coué always emphasized, and that some of these other great psychological teachers, psychological minds from the early part of the 20th century explored and investigated and really articulated so well so many of these ideas that if you consider them deeply, they make a lot of sense, and they not only tie into manifesting ideas, you could say they are the basis of so many of these manifesting ideas. And this is, dealing directly with how we think and what we suggest to ourselves, what we automatically suggest to ourselves, right? What we auto-suggest to ourselves. Autosuggestion, what we're suggesting, what we're thinking, what we're imagining, these words are all synonymous if we're just being practical about it. What we're thinking is in suggesting to ourselves and accepting as true. All that happens very subtly. That's why we call it subconscious. It's subconscious because it's something that's so subtle that we don't really even notice it unless we start to pay attention to it. And it's, as I said, in my opinion, the basis of most of these popular law of attraction, law of assumption ideas that we hear so much about today. But these guys, like the book I'm about to read from, is Suggestion and Autosuggestion by Charles Baudouin, who was someone who studied under Coué and was became a popular, famous, psychologist. The stuff he talks about in this book is not well known or discussed much today, and it's brilliant, and in my opinion, very important to know about if you're into these ideas. We've discussed this at length. I'll put the link above and in the description. My Coué playlist. I love talking about Coué, and one reason I'm so critical of these modern people talking about a lot of these ideas is because they fail to tie Coué into it. And Coué is, in my opinion, almost essential to talk about if we're discussing these ideas. So this book, Suggestion and Autosuggestion by Charles Baudouin, is not the easiest book to read. Coué's book, Self-Mastery Through Conscious Autosuggestion, Coué's writings, The Practice of Autosuggestion by Cyrus Harry Brooks. That stuff's all easier to read than this book. This book's a little bit more technical sounding, a little bit more formal, but it's a masterpiece, and it's really worth looking at. I hadn't really looked at it closely in a number of years, and I now am. Shout out to Hugo. I know Hugo, you know who you are. You mentioned it a couple times, I think, recently. Not recently, but in the last 6 months. But yeah, I've really enjoyed looking at this book again. In this book, Charles Baudouin writes, we shall learn there is a psychological condition prerequisite to all autosuggestion. This is that the idea should have a notable intensity, an intensity which is mainly the outcome of attention. An idea upon which attention is peculiarly concentrated is an idea which tends to realize itself. So how we think, how we imagine, what we're suggesting to ourselves, if we're suggesting something with an intensity and a consistency, he says here, a peculiarly concentrated attention. Whatever we're concentrating upon in this way, this idea that we're concentrating upon attentively, has a tendency to realize itself. This basically is how manifestation works on a psychological level. And what happens, generally speaking, is that we have a lot of ideas that are not constructive. A lot of things that, starting probably when we were kids, we focused on and concentrated on in a peculiar way, in basically an unhealthy, negative way, focused upon, and they formed a lot of the belief systems that we hold to this day. These are belief systems that we basically have created for ourselves and created when we were very young. And then we build upon these belief systems, and we live our lives based of a lot of times on these belief systems that are not actually helpful. And so a lot of the quote unquote limiting beliefs that we have are the result of having this misplaced focus. And this misplaced focus then has a lot of it's built into us so much that it has a lot of intensity to it. So, we talk a lot about like letting go and releasing emotions, becoming more intimate with our emotions, right? It's very helpful to do that because there's so much stuff deep down that we've concentrated upon, that we've negatively focused upon, that's now just kind of running the show. And learning to see that and to realize that this is what's running the show. And what I'm suggesting to myself is because of this stuff that I concentrated on when I was very young, or, was taught and believed, and it's producing all this fear and discomfort and shame, or whatever you want to call it, in me because I concentrated upon it. And now it's Hawkins gives the example in Letting Go of like in the movie Tron, like it's like running there's like a rope, like this system has been built that has all these uncomfortable feelings are the system that's been built, and it's telling you what to think. Basically, it's forming your thought patterns. It's what you're automatically suggesting to yourself, and it's a lot of times negative. I hope this is making some sense. Like I said, this is not an easy video today to digest, but it's an important one if you grasp a little bit of what I'm saying, and I hope I'm being somewhat clear about it. Not easy to explain this. But again, Baudouin said, the psychological condition prerequisite to all autosuggestion is that the idea has a notable intensity, and this intensity is mainly the outcome of attention. So what we pay attention to and focus upon tends to then manifest in our lives in some significant way. And we focus on things because of our these limiting beliefs that we focused on when we were very young and then buy into. We focus on the wrong things. Instead of focusing on becoming healthier, we think about how we're sick. Instead of focusing on love and being in a good relationship, we think about the love we don't have and how we're not in good relationships. Instead of focusing on success and being helpful and productive, we think about how we don't have enough money and aren't satisfied doing what we're doing. All of this stuff is happening quickly, subconsciously, subtly. It's the subtle thoughts you're having throughout the day and accepting. That is autosuggestion. That's how the process works. Again, this is confusing. I hope I'm making some sense here. When we talk about dealing with limiting beliefs, it's like, you can become quiet. You can feel the feelings you're feeling, and you can notice your thoughts, what automatically comes up, what you're automatically thinking. Thought after thought after thought after thought. Pay attention to those negative thoughts, some. And again, this deals a lot with like the shadow work stuff that I made a podcast episode of recently, in regards to like David Hawkins and letting go. I'll link to that episode above. So a little bit further on in this book, Charles Baudouin writes about how, again, we're basically ignorant of like our thinking and how quick, like what we're suggesting to ourselves and how negative it can be. And how, through doing this work that Coué talks about, and doing the work also, in my opinion, that like David Hawkins talks about, letting go, releasing, and all of the emotional intimacy work we've been talking about, we become more aware of how our thinking is leading us down the wrong path. And then we're able, by seeing it clearly, and no longer fighting against it, but just acknowledging it fully and be like, oh, this is how it is. This is what I'm auto-suggesting. This is the thinking patterns I'm playing into constantly. Instead of fighting against it, we're able to say, okay, this is how it is. And because this is how it is, I start to be able to let it go and not play into it as much. And if I don't play into that thinking pattern and start naturally creating a more productive, healthy thinking pattern, that old thinking pattern, those old limiting beliefs start to fade away some. Anyway, in Suggestion and Autosuggestion, Charles Baudouin writes, there is an additional reason for our ignorance. Autosuggestion can operate upon us with incalculable power. Now, if we permit this force to work spontaneously, in default of rational guidance, disastrous consequences may ensue, and do in fact often ensue. A large number of illnesses arise from this cause alone. In other words, us thinking bad, negative thoughts about something instead of constructive thoughts. He goes on to say, even in the case of morbid phenomena whose cause is obviously physical, it frequently happens among persons, and they form the enormous majority, who do not understand the mechanism of spontaneous suggestion, that this force considerably aggravates the malady. In other words, a person might really be physically sick, but they make their sickness much worse by suggesting and thinking the wrong things. Again, instead of genuinely thinking I'm getting healthier, they genuinely think that they're sick and getting worse or not improving. He goes on to write, but if by our own insight or with the help of others we discover that we have been the architects of our own sufferings, we are extremely loath to admit so humiliating a truth. In fact, we refuse to admit it, and directly the discovery presses upon our consciousness, there ensues what psychoanalysts have termed repression, the phenomenon whereby we are induced to forget the very reasons which have led us to the dreaded conclusion. Again, this is our shadow. This is why we do shadow work, so we can bring this up and actually see it. Because we're loath to acknowledge how negatively and unproductively we tend to suggest things to ourselves. How, in short, fucked up we are a lot of the time about many things in our lives. Charles Baudouin goes on to say, this foolish vanity is far from being exceptional. Those who protest most energetically that they know not of it are often most completely enthralled by it, and their protests are nothing more than one of the numerous artifices which the censor employs to fool the consciousness. The same remark applies to the protests of persons who declare they have never been the victims of unfortunate autosuggestions. We have all suffered in this way, and especially those who regard themselves as immune. So the stuff going on in our lives subconsciously, underneath the surface, is the stuff that makes our lives either work successfully, where we feel good a lot of the time, or makes it so our lives feel bad, unproductive, feels like we're suffering all the time. It's subconsciously what we're allowing to go on. By subconsciously, I mean imaginatively, what we're thinking to ourselves, thought after thought after thought after thought. And if it was as simple as just dealing with the thoughts one after another, it might be a different ballgame, but that's not really how it works. These limiting beliefs, this negativity, is so ingrained in us that it brings with it all these really uncomfortable feelings. And these uncomfortable feelings then engender more and more negative suggestions, which we buy into. Again, this is the benefit of combining this knowledge about autosuggestion with something like releasing work or the letting go process that David Hawkins talks about, where you feel into the feelings. Notice then, by doing that, how many crazy thoughts are associated with the feelings, but get to the root. Don't pay attention necessarily to the thinking. Pay attention to the feeling underneath it, and let the feeling be there and see how it shifts. And notice how it's directing your autosuggestions in so many ways. In my opinion, there's usually these huge limiting beliefs underneath these uncomfortable feelings. And if we learn how to work with these uncomfortable feelings, we start to unearth these limiting beliefs. These limiting beliefs become something we can actually work with and actually become friendly with in a strange way by feeling into the feelings and seeing that these limiting beliefs and what they're causing us to suggest to ourselves and believe that none of it's true. Again, difficult thing to talk about. That's why nobody on YouTube talks about this. And if this is like the first video of mine you've watched in regards to autosuggestion, it's a bad place to start. Charles Baudouin, this book, Suggestion and Autosuggestion, is not an easy book. And there's plenty of other Coué videos that are much more straightforward that I've made. And, you can read Coué or read Simple Self-Healing, the book I did of Coué's teachings, which are much more straightforward. But if you're already into this stuff and you're into doing, self-work, inner work, and you're trying to work with your feelings and what you're suggesting to yourself, you'll probably already be aware and become increasingly aware of the person who fucks things up in your life for you, truly, is yourself. And so much of this work is just acknowledging that, working with that, and doing your best to feel better, get better, day after day. In every way, I'm getting better and better. So I hope this was helpful. Any questions, let me know. RadicalCounselor.com.